Hi everyone, welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes before we begin as people come in, but yeah, great to see you all here. I'm in London right now. Whereabouts is everyone from? I think you can put in the chat function if you want where you're based tonight.
Yeah, I think the panel is pretty kind of national and international as well, so it's always interesting to see where everyone else is from.
Oh, Whitechapel, this is down the road from me. But it is amazing, I think. Oh, Suffolk. Cool. Hi, Hannah. Peckham? Oh, you're down the road. I'm in Queen's Road, Peckham. Great. Hi, Orlando. Hi, Miranda. Maybe I'll make a start now. Just 1 second. I'm going to do something embarrassing and spotlight myself. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is evening here in London. My name is Louisa Ouliette, and I'm curator of talks and events at the Photographers Gallery. I'm delighted to be here with Buhlebezwe Siwani and Mariama Attah. From South Africa, Buhlebezwe is speaking to us tonight from Paris, where she currently is based for residency. I believe you leave tomorrow, from what you said earlier. As an artist working across photography, performance, installation, and moving image, Buhlebezwe will talk us through her experience of addressing issues around the Black body, patriarchy, activism, and spirituality, themes that thread her practice together. She's currently working on a show at Sonbeck in Amsterdam, which should be opening this coming out April. And this is the first time I think that you're speaking with the UK organization, so we're really thrilled to have you here tonight. Joining Buhlebezwe is curator and writer Mariama Attah. Currently at Open Eye Gallery in Liverpool, Mariama has also previously worked as an editor at Faux Magazine and was responsible for developing and curating programs and events while at PhotoWorks. Thank you both for joining us this evening. In terms of format, they will be in conversation for roughly 40 minutes before we move to comments and questions from you. You can submit these throughout the chat, throughout the talk using the chat function where some of you submitted where you're based tonight, or they can be posed directly to Buhlebezwe and Mariama at the end by electronically raising your hand using the Zoom function, and then I will ask you to unmute yourself. The event should last roughly 1 hour in total. We are approaching this event in the same way we do all of our public programs, which is with the aim of creating a forum of trust and mutual respect. So please keep that in mind. Before we start, I would like to thank my colleague, Janice McLaren, for her support. And lastly, to you all for joining us. We hope to see you again at some of our other forthcoming online activities. And thank you all again. And now to Buhlebezwe Siwani and Mariama Attah.
Well, thank you to the Photographers Gallery for the invitation and also for that introduction. I know that I have a lot of comments and thoughts and questions to get us through the next 40 minutes or so. So I think we're going to go straight to the presentation. And that just really gives everyone an idea of some of the ideas or themes or topics that we're going to be talking about in the presentation. So I think if we're ready, I think that should be showing for everyone now.
All right. Sorry, my computer's freezing.
Shall I begin?
Yeah, why don't you start? Maybe you could expand on that introduction a little bit and then go into some of the projects or some of the ideas that we're going to be talking about this evening.
Okay, great. So thanks for the invite. And I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak about my work with you, Mariama. My name is actually Buhlebezwe Siwani. I know it's a little bit difficult for people sometimes to say. I basically did my undergrad in Johannesburg at the University of Witwatersrand. And then I just took 2 years off to kind of find myself spiritually because I was feeling very disavowed by the art world, and just I was not engaging with it on my terms. So I just needed to find myself a little bit. And then by my fourth year, I think I had already started making work about my spiritual journey. So I just needed some time to just reflect and understand what it was and how my practice, my spiritual practice, was bleeding into my artistic practice, which then led me to my master's at the University of Cape Town, Michaelis School of Fine Arts, which is when I began making this work, which was the first image that you saw, titled Kunusa Buhle, from the triptych Kunusa Buhle. And so the work that I make is under the umbrella of spirituality, but there's so much to unpack regarding spirituality within the idea of the Black female body and what it means to be a Black woman, what Black womanhood is in South Africa regarding post 1994, and what it means, you know, after 1653. So during colonization by the Dutch, colonization by the English, apartheid, and what it means to be a free woman, essentially, and how you can practice your own spiritual beliefs, and how we could possibly go back to understanding and unpacking ideas such as race, gender, sex, under history, culture, under the umbrella of spirituality. So I started thinking about ways in which women purify according to culture, according to tradition, and how you would find Black women working in white people's houses or people who were more affluent. And I just started thinking around the idea of how women would cleanse differently to men, why women would be why women had to cleanse more than men, or were thought of as dirtier. And those were the ideas that were just, you know, traffic in my mind. And I started thinking around the idea of soap, but then it moved to cow dung, because cow dung is used in ritual to clean, but also to build. So it was almost like building onto oneself, which are the three images. And then holy ash, which is used to purify after menstruation or after death. And those were the three images. And I used the undressed body because I thought that the body is just a costume anyway. We are all costumed by the genetics of our ancestors. So I really just love the idea that the body is not just an object, it is also subject, but it is also just costumed by so many people who come before us that it no longer really belongs to you. It's just a vessel to traverse the earth. And that's where the triptych came from. And the enamel bowl was actually something that was brought by the Dutch, and then it just got co-opted into the cultural practices of Black people. And now it's kind of like a mnemonic. It's a signifier. We use it for everything: to wash, to put food in, to store stuff. It's used in so many in rural parts of South Africa, but it's also used for gatherings, rituals, So I just kind of wanted to put that in there. Everything has a significance in the photograph. And the way that it was shot was I had really a lot of help from a friend, George Debokomahashe, to shoot this triptych, because he has a special way to work with lights. And I was really interested in how to make kind of a reference to some Renaissance or chiaroscuro kind of thing. So the lighting had to be soft, but not too soft, so that it kind of didn't sexualize the body too much, because it doesn't look, it doesn't, so that the body just speaks for itself, and it isn't fetishized. Yeah. So I don't know if Louisa, your computer has unfrozen itself.
I think we're hoping to have the images up in a little bit, but I thought I might just jump in there and kind of pick up on some of those things that you've been saying. So the title of the talk is Activism, Home, and Spirituality. And I was hoping that we could maybe talk a little bit more about that context of home and belonging. So looking at what you were saying about the idea of kind of the Dutch influence and how that has been kind of co-opted and naturalized into a South African way of being. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about like, what is that idea of home when you're talking about that, either through your words or through like your visual communication, and thinking about like some of those ideas or elements that shapes that understanding of home.
Whew, I've never been asked this question before. The idea of home, is it's a really tough one for me, because I always think about home as, the cliche, it's where you make it, or but for me, it's where my ancestors moved me to. If they find a home, I'm there. And if they unpack, I unpack my baggage too. And in that way, I think home, South Africa for me is home, because that's where I learned to unpack my visual language and unpack my baggage, using the idea of what home means and who the people at home are. It just makes it so much easier to kind of get into the more complex things about the more complex ideas, the more complex practices of my people. My home is where my people are. So I will make work about my people, which just translates into home.
It sounds a little bit like that reading of home is really dependent on like perspectives or contexts. So when you're in your home, and the way that you think about it might be slightly different to when you're in Paris or when you're in Amsterdam or when you're kind of traveling and just away from home. And does that come into the way that you think about those images? Like when you come back to them and you're looking at them from a different context, like what is that reading of home? Like how flexible is it?
Oh, the reading of home. I generally don't. So for me, if I take, for example, my exhibition and it's seen in London by somebody who's non-South African or has never been to South Africa, has never experienced the people, the culture, and I always think that in the mind somewhere, someone can relate to something. There's always a relational quality about the work visually. If it touches you, the work, I always aim for it to touch you somewhat. And I think in that way, home is in the mind. It exists there. I'm comfortable in Paris because I know what my visual language is here. It exists. I can see the images in my head. I know what I'm talking about. I'm comfortable with my subject matter. But sometimes home should be uncomfortable. So I like the idea that home is in the mind, because the mind is an uncomfortable place to kind of sit in.
So like, I feel like there's also maybe an element or like an idea of like tension or confusion when you're trying to read something that's maybe outside of its context or something that you're not familiar with. And is that like, how do you encourage readers or viewers of your work to kind of work through that? Or do you want them to kind of sit with that discomfort and that tension?
I don't think that's my responsibility. My responsibility is to speak back to what I feel like the real issues are, and whether it's up to the viewer, because you made a choice to go and see the work. The work didn't come to you. You made a choice. So whether you engage with it or not, it must be on your own terms. You must engage. You should be engaging with work on your own terms. And that's, I think about making work in the same way. And I don't expect anybody to engage or relate or to come away feeling, touched or feeling like, oh, this was or melancholic or anything. One thing that one should always come away from, though, with work is some education. They should educate themselves about something. If there's a subject that they don't understand, dig deeper. There's always something there. There's always something there that one doesn't understand. Generally, you'll get an artist statement, which will give you like a short little thing about it. But I generally like people to just go see the work and sit with it, whether it's uncomfortable or not. They've engaged with it by themselves on their own terms.
And so we haven't seen the oh no, now we can see the presentation. Okay.
Yes.
Well, something that is like very apparent when we're looking at your images is that you're working across like a lot of different formats, or like a lot of different outputs and media. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about, like, you work in performance and installation and photography. And can you talk a little bit about like how they relate to each other or how they don't relate to each other? And just that idea, like I was watching an interview that you did before, and you're talking about the idea of photography as a performance in itself. Maybe like walk us through that a little bit more.
All right, sure. This is a very short answer. My belief is that everything performs. My belief is that photographs perform, videos perform, because they have subjects, because they have meaning, because they perform something. There's an action, there's something happening. It's something that's been caught in, it's a moment of time, or it's something that's moving in a moment of time. The bowl means something. It's performing an action because it's making you feel some type of way. People are performing life. And I think that everything does that. Like a photograph has a purpose, a table has a purpose. So everything, every object in your house, everything that you do, everything that you see has a purpose. Therefore, it performs, which is how I see the work. I think the work, if it does not have some element of performance, because my work starts from a point of performance. So I, as a performance artist who's able to do different things, I generally let the work decide what it is. But it all starts with me in my head as a performance. Like, okay, cool, I've been thinking about the beach, because there's something that's being taken, there's something that's being done. It's a performance. It's a performance that's been distilled, that's been caught. It's a moment in time that's just been caught, and so it's performing that moment in time, and that's what I see photographs as, objects as installations, sculptures, and videos.
And do you think that they have like different visual vocabularies? Like, is there something that photography can do that installation or sculpture can't? Or are they kind of, is there just no hierarchy in that sense?
Well, I don't have one. I just like to think that when the work chooses itself, it just, it chooses the best way to live. And for me, that decision comes after I've tried a couple of things.
And
Yeah.
then could maybe go back to like some of the things that you were talking about before around like spirituality. So I think, yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit more about like how you draw on that to make the works, or how spirituality presents itself in performance.
How spirituality presents itself in performance for me is that everything I do, I begin, I started my work in my undergrad, which is why I mentioned it. I was going through a journey of healing, and a journey of learning who I am and who my ancestors are, and learning what it means to be a traditional healer and how to do that. So that was 2 years of my life. And I remember the day when I thought about, because I was a painting major, I had just quit photography. I was like, I'm never going to touch a camera again. And because I had a not so nice photography teacher, and I really did not enjoy her. And when it was time to choose my major again in the fourth year, I just dropped it in my third year. And when I went into my honors year, I was like, no. Subsequently, though, later on in my fourth year, which is where I'm getting to, I picked it up again. But anyway, I was walking, and I was dressed very differently because there's an attire that a trainee who is going through the initiation process has to wear. And I was also barefoot. And I bumped into one of my lecturers who used to teach first year and second year students. And he said, "Oh, is this a performance?" And I was like, "This is my life."
No.
Yeah, so it was a very interesting time for me. And then the thought popped up. I was like, you know what? No one's really doing performance in my year. Why don't I just try it? It's the last part of the year. Let me try and engage with it. And I just dove right in. And I have never looked back since, because for me, it's a symbiotic relationship. Because I believe everything performs now. It's informed every decision I've made and how I've made work. So they live side by side, spirituality and my work and my practice. There's no difference for me. My spiritual work is the work.
I'm really curious about the photography teacher who put you off photography.
Oh.
What would you say to them now? Like, I'm so curious to know, like, how they might perceive your work, and even like what you think of them. Like, education has such like a formative and like a shaping hand on the things that we end up doing, for better or for worse. And I would just love to hear like what your thoughts are on that teacher and how they accidentally or intentionally kind of shaped where you are today.
I'm really happy that happened. So I met her at my exhibition. So I was having a solo exhibition in South Africa, in Cape Town, and she came by. She's never had one, by the way.
For anyone who was curious to know.
Just a little bit of shade, but and the fact that I had photographs there, she had quite a bit to say about the photographs and the way that they looked. And in my mind, I was like, thank you for the critique. I appreciate it. But you and I have very different subject matter, and we have very different styles. And I'm very glad I had that moment, and I'm glad that I still saw her work. I really like her technical ability. I just don't like her subject matter. But I also don't like her as a person. So I think that she really did a good job of putting me off, but she didn't do a good enough one that I walked away completely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could talk a bit more specifically about like some of those themes and the images that we can see scrolling as well. So I can see that you're like interested in the use of the body. And I'm just curious, can you maybe talk a little bit about your thoughts on the relationship between photography and the body, and the female body, and the Black female body? So those are all similar, but very, very different.
Yeah, okay, cool. But I would need you to be super specific about these questions.
Okay, so photography, or rather the camera, has a very kind of long history, and photography has a very long history of objectifying people, for better or for worse, or putting people into hierarchies, or using it originally as a tool to kind of record and document similarities and differences between like people and things and objects. And I'm really curious to know more about, how do you, knowing that history of how people were recorded, of how women were documented, of how Black people have been photographed, what is it that you have in your mind when you're making these images? And what is it that you want to like reference or draw on, or what is it that you're trying to dispel, or like what is the message that you're either trying to like deliver or rework?
Right. Okay. So I'll begin with this. I take images that are, one, in my control. Two, I direct the gaze and I direct the photograph. I take images that speak when people cannot and when people have not been able to speak. I take images because I feel that we have stories that have been told far too many times by other people in their own way. And now I get to direct and navigate it on my own terms. I take images with other people and I make work with other people sometimes with their input, because it's their story and it's also their body and it's my body too. I'm not putting anybody else's body most of the time. I think all of the photographs I've done have been my body, except for a video piece. 2 video pieces, but I always make sure to use family members or people I know very well, because I know their politics. I know what they will allow and I know what they will not. They are comfortable enough to say what they want and what they will not do. Too many times Black female bodies have been fetishized, sexualized. There's a gaze towards, this is not an FHM GQ for men, or it's not for that kind. It's not that kind of story. I don't want to tell those kinds of stories. Those stories have been told. I want to tell the stories of my people using my own body, because who better than myself, because I know me. And if I know how to use my body and I can control it and I can speak for it, my body speaks for itself. I don't need another body to speak. That's why I would rather be in the photograph and not outside it. I think that kind of answers that. No?
Yeah, I mean, my next question was going to be about control, but I think we can skip neatly over that one, because that fully answers that.
Okay.
So, like, maybe you could talk a little bit about that social responsibility then. If you're aware of that history of photography, understanding how it has been used by people, how it's been used against people, how people have been taken out of history, how they've had their stories told for them, how those narratives have been shaped or destroyed. What is that social responsibility that you have, knowing all of that? Like, how do you work with that? Like, what is the burden, or is that a gift?
Personally, it's neither nor. It's, as you said, it's a responsibility to speak of where we are right now. I love what the youth in South Africa are doing. The kids are all right. They're doing great. Personally, for me, where I come from is a very specific place, and my people are very specific people with a very, the history is just, it's intense. So when we speak, there's so many things that are hidden, layered. There's nuances that we have to kind of uncover. There are things that we have to dig out. And I so wish that there would be access. There's something that has to do with social responsibility that I think we don't pay attention to a lot, which is access and language, and how we speak to people and how they are able to access our work is so important, because we're not making work in a bubble. And if we're making work about our people, and I'm making work about the stories of our people and the stories about the Black female body, that Black female body should be able to access in a language that is open to them. And what better language than a visual language? But if your work is not able to go into a newspaper, or because somebody can't get to a gallery, can't get to a museum because it's too far, they don't have money, how are we making all of this work and your people cannot access it? For me, that's a big problem. However, I keep hoping that the reason why I still have Facebook and I still have Instagram is because I know that it will reach some people who would rather look on Instagram and have data, and they'll be looking on their phone like, oh, okay, this is really interesting. I read. There's a lot of younger people who reach out and they're like, how do I do this? Your work is really interesting. Can you tell me more? And I never turn them away because it's my responsibility. If I'm going to make the work, I should be able to say, okay, let's do this. Meet me here. I'll even take you on a walk and we'll talk about the work. Because if you're not making work about the society or that is reflective of the times, I think somebody said this, I forgot who it was, but it's a very famous quote. If you're not making work that reflects the moment or the society, the place and time that you're in, why are you making work? I'm not about to paint pretty flowers or take pictures of pretty flowers. Doesn't make sense for me as a Black woman. There's so much more that's going on with Black bodies, Black female bodies, that it's really irresponsible for me to be like, oh, I would love to take pictures or paint pretty flowers, but that's the last thing on my mind, because there are Black women dying. How many women this is just an example. For every George Floyd there is, how many women are there? How many women? There's one that we all remember, Breonna Taylor. But how many men can we count? So many. But how many women are reported who are not only shot by the police, but are killed by their spouse? There's so much more that Black women have, to deal with on the daily, that it's just irresponsible for me to go, I'm just going to take a back seat and make work about this. La, 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 la. No. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that leads really nicely into this next section, which is much more about the sector itself. So being aware of making art within a context, and you're saying you're obviously not making work in a bubble. You're drawing on references, you're working with other people, you're showing work, you're creating work. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how the sector works for you, or how you feel about working in the visual art sector, just in terms of maybe the expectations that it has for you, or how there might be some kind of feeling of entitlement to your time or your talent or your body or your thoughts as a practitioner. I would really love to hear more about that. And how do you manage that?
Okay, I'll start with how I manage it. So it's been really simple for me. Last year I learned about boundaries, and I began saying no to things, no to exhibitions, no to people. And I felt very comfortable. I started saying no to my mother. And this was a really big thing for me. So if I could say no to my mother, I can definitely say no to an exhibition, even if it might, push my career into the right direction. I just now know that some things are not, if it doesn't sit well with me, or it just doesn't align with my spirit, I will not do it. It's not for me. There's things like art fairs. I do not go to them, even if my work is showing, because I feel like they're not for the artists, or people just feel super entitled to your time. And honestly, I don't think that it's important to have, I'm not a fan of small talk. And generally, it's come to the point where my gallerist has asked me not to come, which I'm really happy about. I don't mind, because I can be a little bit too verbose, or just appear to be slightly blunt when it comes to, because I don't mince my words either. I don't have time for that. I don't think anybody should, because I don't like small talk. So, the art world has become very, I think, very excited with the idea of celebrity, of artists as superstar, artists as celebrity. And I really think it's important to think about the integrity of the work and the honesty of the work. And the honesty and integrity of the work and the person who's making the work sometimes is as important as the work that's being made. And that should be the leading factor, as opposed to, oh, this artist is coming here, they're so famous, they're making so much, you know, it's, and there's also a sense of overproduction, where people just tend to not think about what they're making anymore. They're turning into factories. So we're just duplicating. And we're not taking time to just take it slow, especially during this period. We should be taking time to focus and just hone in on our craft and perfect it. We've been given this time, even though it's not easy, to just sit down, reevaluate, and look at what's important, I think, if you want, and just kind of, you know, give tender little brush strokes to the work that you're creating. And I think the art world needs a little bit of tenderness. It can be really, really harsh. I keep saying, when I used to teach, I used to say to the students, the school is a bubble. And when you come out of it, it's going to be tough, because no one teaches you how to be an artist outside of school, out of university. So you have to navigate your way through the art world, kind of making mistakes. But you have to become your own accountant, your assistant, your own production, your publicist. You are all these things in one, because essentially the artist is a business.
Yeah, and you're advocating for yourself as well. You don't have like your peers, and you don't have your lecturers doing that for you. Suddenly you are everything, and you're suddenly competing with lots of other people who've been doing it for a lot longer than you have, which is daunting.
Exactly.
I think
it is.
I have like a lot more questions, and we can go for a little bit longer, but I think we're also going to start inviting questions from people who are watching as well. But I think like while you're waiting for those questions to come through, I also, and it kind of leads on from what we were just talking about, that idea of you go from a space where you have peers and you have support and you have structure, to working in the sector where your success, at least in the very beginning, depends on you and yourself. I'm really interested in like working collectively, like co-authoring things, and like working in kind of joint ways. And I think that is one way of kind of getting around those huge hurdles, particularly when people are just first entering that sector. So can you, like, what are your thoughts on like that collective way of working? And is that something that you like were encouraging your students to adopt, that kind of like co-authorship model?
If you don't have the personality for it, don't do it. That's all I have to say on that. I think it's tough. I was in a collective, and working with 10 other women can be very, very difficult, especially when they're all very strong personalities. So you need to know who you're working with, but everybody needs support. So as long as you've got a support structure, everyone needs a support structure. But a support structure, I think, is different for everybody, but everybody needs a community of artists. So I was lucky enough to be in a studio space where the artists there were 12 studios, and all of us would have lunch or dinner together, and it became like a family. The collective also became like a family. But, you know, you've got to have the personality for it.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you don't, it's almost, you're gonna feel like the runt of the litter, to put it harshly. Yeah, to put it bluntly. Yeah.
I guess that's a useful lesson to learn in itself, but again, yeah, it's going to be a painful lesson for people.
Yeah, but we all have to learn painful lessons in order to learn who we are.
Okay, I'm gonna have a quick look at. Okay, we've got a nice one to start with, and that is from Stacy. And Stacy is asking, can I ask which women have inspired or supported you?
Which women have inspired or supported me? Woo! I've had so much support. First, it's my family, but I think you're asking about artists, right?
I imagine,
No,
yeah,
I don't
let's
know.
artists, and then we can kind of broaden those horizons if we need to.
Okay, cool. So I've had support a lot from when I was in Cape Town. My first residency actually came from another performance artist, and she was amazing. I had only met her once, and she had seen my work once, and it was the first residency I had gone to over to Europe, and she just put my name for it, and I went on this residency. I later found out that was through her. Then I later worked with her on a collaborative performance piece. And yeah, she was a very supportive woman. Mamela Nyamza is her name. And then I also had my supervisor, who I'm still friends with now. It's amazing. We became friends after I finished my master's. Her name is Bernie Searle. I think you know her. She's very well known. She was very instrumental in how I finished my master's degree, and also in kind of helping me with understanding what my role would be in the art world, and kind of making sure that I wasn't derailing, because I had moments where, because I have a lot of energy sometimes, and I can go on and on and on and off a tangent. So she just made sure that I stuck to exactly what it was that I wanted to make and what I was sure about. And then there was also Nomusa Makubu, who is now just, she's teaching. She's also really, really amazing. But there are also artists who inspired me: Anna Mendieta, Coco Fasco, Bernie, Nomusa, Mamela, Nandipa. Yeah, there's a lot. Wura, Ogunji, also just Adeola. Adeola Gold. There's a lot. There's a lot of women.
This is a very good list to start with. I think that's going to give people a good idea of where you're coming from. Can we go back to what you were saying about what your role is?
Yeah, so that's been... Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Oh, sorry, you broke up a little bit. I was like, you mentioned that you kind of discovered, or you found out what your role was when you were doing your master's. Yeah. Can you tell us what that is?
I felt like my role was to exist in a liminal space, to question, not to answer, but to also poke at by putting the Black female body at the forefront, as opposed to it kind of being a shy Black female body, and to be unapologetic about it. And my stance on spirituality, and why I would not demonize my own spiritual belief systems, and why it was important for me to highlight them, and to highlight that we've got a problem because, African spiritualisms were co-opted, and this is how I break it down. So, going down that path, sometimes you can derail and say, okay, I'm going to go too much into this, but you need to come back, because that's what the work is about. And slowly over time, I've learned how to, stick to that.
I feel like that kind of lends itself to like ideas or questions around like ideas of value. So what is in terms of like spiritualism in Africa might not, or definitely doesn't look the same outside of it. And I'm really interested in the idea of trying to untrain my eye, or to relearn a new perspective when it comes to understanding what art looks like around the world. Do you have any thoughts on like whether that's even possible? The idea of you've studied and you've lived and you've worked in a particular context. And so your ideas of art are shaped by that context. Your thoughts of value, your perspective has all been baked into that. And I'm really interested in if it's possible to undo that. And I'm just curious what you think about that.
Ooh, I don't think that anyone, maybe that's interesting. You know, I never thought about attaching value of work according to where you come from in the way that you've just described it. I've always thought of it in the sense that if there's one term I really detest, it's African art, because it connotes, there's this connotation that because it comes from the African continent, it can't be contemporary. It must mean it can't be contemporary, you know, so there must be a lesser value, or it must mean that there's a really high value. But then you put all these people who do different things in the same boat, and it just doesn't work. Because no one calls art from France European art, and you know, if it just comes, oh, it's European art, everybody will say contemporary art is living in. So I don't look at it like that. I'm always just, yeah, I've had particular ideas instilled in me, but I also went to a school where they teach you how to think. You learn how to think on your own, and you learn how to really just, you train your mind to just be open to things, and you become like you become almost like a sponge for information. But that doesn't mean that you can't wring some out and get some more in. That's an analogy I'd like to use. So I really don't think about it like that. I have never thought about people really thinking like that. For me, it almost seems like that would be a little bit, I get what you're saying by, okay, great, I can see where this person went to school. That's totally Dutch art, yeah, quintessential, really mark of the times, etc. But I don't think I would put a value on it. I would just, if the art is great, it's great. If it's whack, it's whack.
Let that be the quote of the evening.
No.
I think that does it. So I'm wondering if anyone else has any questions, or if anyone has any comments, or if they just want to pick up on anything that has been like touched upon a little bit and want us to go back to.
There was a direct question from Tatiana. If you don't mind, I'll read it out. Tatiana says that they really like the aesthetic behind your images for Zumani, my apologies. What was the thought process behind this?
Yes, Zumani. All right, so there were two things. There's a series of photographs from performance of Anna Mendieta, right? And it was kind of like an ode in color. Okay, so it was a direct reference to that. It was also a direct reference to the spiritual, when the body leaves a space, or when the body goes into a liminal space. So it goes into, literally, there's when you go into initiation, you are covered in blood of a certain animal, because you have to imbibe the blood. So I was just thinking about the many transitions of a period of the spirit, and how it is that the three stages are naturally red, white, and black. And so I just started using things that were just natural things to become those three colors. And it was clay, red clay, my hair, and just me being against the white studio wall. Yeah, so that was the story, and the aesthetics make sense because of that. Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. There's another question actually coming in from Daniel, but just on the notion of materials, I don't know if you raised this earlier when I was having a bit of a meltdown with the tech stuff, to be honest. But you mentioned the reference to Anna Mendietta's work and clay in that last body of work. There's also a sense of water and movement. Is there something that you want to say that you haven't said earlier that I might have missed about?
No, I actually haven't said anything about water, and most of my work actually revolves around water. It's actually, when I shot a photograph again for a very long time, I went back to the water and it was just calling. But it's specifically because, there are bodies in the water, there are Black bodies in the water. It's a spiritual space. It's a space where people come to connect with their ancestors. It's a space where Black bodies have died. It's a space where Black bodies come to pray. It's a space where Black bodies find time to cleanse and wash off bad luck, bad spirits, etc., but also to give thanks. So there's a lot of rituals that also happen, and it's always important for me to go back to the water when I reference something ancestral or spiritual. Does that answer that question?
No. It's just something that you see as a very recurring motif in your work, and think about a lot of the other references that you might see in.
Yeah, I mean, the first when I finally touched the camera again, which was in 2000 and I believe 14, I decided to shoot 2 photographs titled which is She Sells Seashells by the Seashore. And it was around my fear of natural bodies of water, but it's a fear that's also the beach that was used is very specific. It was a beach called Monwabisi Beach in Cape Town, and they had beaches for Black people, beaches for white people, and Monwabisi Beach was for Black people, but it was the more dangerous beach. So that beach has like riptides, has rocks, has sharks, has it's more dangerous, but people still go and find joy there, right? But they also do all the things that they need to do there because everybody understands that, okay, this one is praying, this one is doing this one is doing that, and none of that is stopped. So but it was also just speaking again to the idea of colonization history, culture, and how spatial apartheid worked its way even into how we perceive certain spaces, because now I have a fear of going into the water, not only because I'm afraid of my ancestral things inside the water, I'm also afraid that there's so many scary things because of the part of the ocean where I'm at. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Mariama, there's just one more question from Daniel, if you don't mind. I'll read it out, or do you want to?
No, go ahead.
So Daniel Reagan's asking, I suppose it's really about thinking about institutional practices and the role that you have in the sector. And Daniel says that sometimes artists are outspoken and are often seen as difficult because they have strong opinions. Do you have any examples of how you've dealt with this in the art, I guess you mean art world? For instance, working with curators or directors, maybe there's something with the residencies that you've recently experienced that you can share?
Okay. With this residency, no. This residency has been wonderful. Like, it's one of the best residencies I've been at. So no, I haven't had those things. Not even with the curators. I've had moments like that where I've been, called a little bit diva-ish or angry. Angry, I hear a lot. And I'm not angry. I just have a lot to say and I'm not going to keep quiet, or if you ask me a question, I'm not going to lie. So if people are asking questions, they must be prepared for the answer, whether they like it or not. That's how I feel. And once people get to know me, they're just like, okay, she's just like that. It doesn't come from a place of me trying to hurt or be mean or whatever. But to answer your question very bluntly, Daniel, I don't care. I don't care. It's not my responsibility to babysit people's feelings. And I don't feel that I should, because at the end of the day, if you are asking a question, you should be able to, you should be able to take, I'm very empathetic though, which can be tough sometimes. So I can read where a person is coming from. And if they're coming from a very innocent place, then I tend to be more empathetic and more, I'll take my time with it and explain. And I'll be very patient. Patience is key. Patience is key. It's good. But then I have moments where, oh my God, you talk so much about this and this. Are you angry? And I'm like, aren't we all then? If I'm angry, then you must be too, because I really don't care about that kind of stuff. It's just because I've been called angry and outspoken too many times, that is just water off a duck's back at this point. I need to stand up for the things that I want and the things that I believe in. And if I don't stand up for them, how will I get them?
Very well said.
That's it. Yeah.
Do you think we have time for one more question, Mariama?
Yeah.
There's some great comments, by the way, also in the chat function that I don't know if I'd be able to summarize right now, but but just really thanking you for the and for being so outspoken and speaking your truth, really. We have one final question maybe from Eve Milner, who's asking, what would you say to your 7-year-old self? And maybe there's an opportunity for you to think about some of the reflection that you've been doing maybe in this time as well.
I already know. Oh, wow. I don't know if many people can actually remember their 7-year-old self, but I kind of remember 7-year-old me. Awkward Black girl. Yeah, that was me. But I had so I think the reason why I'm outspoken is because my grandmother started an NGO for children's rights, and I must have been like 4 or 3, somewhere there. So we were never beaten as children, and we were always like, it was a very democratic household. Adults could be wrong. Adults apologized. If a child says you did this, this, and that, and the adult felt like there was no fault in that, then we were given a chance to speak up for ourselves, which I really appreciate. I really appreciate that about my grandmother, and she still does that to this day. So my 7-year-old self was not afraid to speak and speak to adults as well. So I had little concerts at home as a 6-year-old and 7-year-old, and I would make my whole family watch me perform by myself. So given who I was at 7, I would say that keep doing what you're doing, and you're going to end up where you belong as long as you believe. Because at that point in time, I didn't know who I was and what I was doing, but I knew that there were people who would be there for the whole entire ride. Yeah, so 7-year-old me should trust herself more and not worry so much.
Oh, I think you're muted.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself because I was nodding and umming a lot. That's a nice way to end tonight. Thank you for that. Thank you everyone for joining us. There was a question, by the way, about this being recorded. It is. So that will be available on our event page as well as on our YouTube channel. And thank you very much for your contributions this evening. We really appreciate your ongoing commitment to the gallery, and we really wouldn't be able to do what we do without you. And at a time when we are unable to open our doors to you, we are grateful to be welcomed into your homes, so thank you. If you have a moment, we'd love to hear from you. So we'll be doing a quick poll at the end of this to get some feedback. Thank you again, Mariama and Buhlebezwe. It's been really nice hearing your thoughts and just getting a sense of your practice of Buhlebezwe, and also Mariama, just the way you think and the way you approach work. So thank you again. And anyway, I hope you're all okay. Please keep checking our website for updates on forthcoming program. And thank you again, and hopefully see you all soon. Bye, everyone. And thank you for bearing with us for the technical issues earlier.
Thank you so much. This was great. I really, really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I hope there'll be a chance to maybe pick up a conversation again with you at some point when you're this way again. But thanks, everyone. I have a holding slide. Thank you to everyone, but I'm scared to put it up, so I probably won't, just because I think it'll freeze everything again. But thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Oh, okay. I can't vote.
Buhlebezwe, you're still on camera.
Oh, crap.
I'll tell you, okay. Bye.